From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. With workplace mental health becoming a safety prerogative, this is the source of information on psychological injury prevention and health promotion.
Hi, and welcome to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. My name is Jason Van Schie, and I'm one of the hosts of the show. The aim of the podcast is to rapidly increase the knowledge and application of psychological health and safety in workplaces worldwide. To help with this, we have regular guests from around the world who are leading the way in this important area. But before I introduce our guest and topic for today, allow me to introduce my co-host, Joelle Mitchell. Hey today, Joelle.
I had an interesting sleep, and I've noticed something about my brain, and I don't know if it's normal or unusual.
If it's you, it's probably more on the unusual side.
Can I describe what happened first before you diagnose me?
No.
No.
Okay, tell me what happened.
So, and this has happened to me a few times previously as well. So I was asleep in the middle of the night, kind of asleep. And obviously I'd felt something tickling my neck, but not consciously. And so as I've woken up, my hand has come up and grabbed, squashed and thrown off the side of the bed, the thing that was
which
crawling my neck.
wasn't really there.
It was there.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
But this is while I'm awaking from a very deep sleep. This has happened at the same time. And it's happened to me a few times in my life where that's it's been an instant. So
you're going to say a few things lately. I was going to say you need a pest.
Not lately. Not
controller
lately, but just over the course. I can remember even as a child it happening as well. And then I checked the floor this morning and there was a slater beetle dead on the floor that I'd squished. And then I just had disturbed sleep for the rest of the night because part of my brain was no, go back to sleep. And then another part of my brain was no, alert, we're being attacked by something.
Yeah. No, it reminds me of the movie Wrath of Khan, Star Trek, and a little bug crawling in someone's ear that gave me nightmares when I was a kid. But
Well, I wear earplugs to sleep, so no chance of that.
Yeah, okay. So there's no risk.
Well, it could have been a spider, though. Spider that was going to bite me, and then I'd be Spider-Man.
I don't see the downside.
It would be kind of cool.
It would be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I can't see anything unusual about that. I know a good psych I can recommend you to that you can sit down with and explore if you like, but I don't see anything unusual with that.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting.
Interesting that you have that sense to do that.
Action.
And you're actually a pacifist when you're conscious and a killer.
I know. Don't come at me when I'm sleeping. That's when I'm my least vulnerable.
Yeah.
my body will defend myself before I'm awake.
There you go, people. Okay. Listeners, if you're interested in attacking Joelle, wait till she's awake.
Wait till I'm awake, yeah. Good call.
Yeah. All right. Well, interesting. I learned something new about you every podcast.
Yeah, I was I wonder if that's a normal thing that people's brains do. It's not real. I guess it's attached to fight or flight in a way, but it's still it's not just the release of the neurochemicals. It's actually a physical, a behavioural response attached to it.
I continue to be amazed by you, Joelle. So that's what I can say.
Shucks.
Always
I'll take that as a compliment, regardless of how it's meant.
All right. Well, look, we should probably introduce our guest who's been patiently waiting. Yeah. So this guest of ours holds a PhD in pharmacy and has worked in clinical service delivery, academic research, health technology assessment, and patient outcomes research before moving to the corporate world. She is the current CEO of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance Australia. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Kim Hamrosi.
Thank you so much, Jason and Joelle. Lovely to be here.
And Kim, it's been a long time coming. I believe we've been trying to schedule this in with you for well over a year. Definitely
over a year.
Yeah, and really glad to have you on to talk about the great work that the Alliance is doing.
Look, by waiting a year, I actually probably have more to talk about what we've been doing.
Things progress pretty quickly with the Corporate Mental Health Alliance, as we've observed firsthand. So, we're really interested to hear more about what the Alliance is doing and some of the future aspirations as well, which would be great.
Happy to share.
So before we get into that, though, what podcast do you like to listen to, Kim?
Well, Obviously this one,
Obviously.
clearly. Bit of a mix. I do probably a bit of a cliche, the old Adam Grant's Work-Life podcast. I think probably everyone says that, do they? Your Undivided Attention is another one I've enjoyed around from the Centre for Humane Technology around how we can use technology for good. And there's another one that I've just recently discovered called Philosophize This, and it goes back to a lot of the old philosophers and sort of breaks it down into easy to understand topics that are short, 20 minutes. And so it really gives you a great view. So I've just started to do that. But I am probably more a book reader than a podcast listener overall.
Yeah.
Must be nice to have that time just to sit there, read a book.
I read 3 books in my break.
I know, you had a good break, didn't you?
Yeah. 2 weeks. I was like, I'm not doing any housework. I'm just going to sit and I'm going to read my books.
What did you read, Joelle? What did you read?
Oh, just some science fiction, escapism. Yeah, good fun.
Very nice.
So can you tell us about your professional career, please, Kim?
I can. I've had quite a varied, as Jason sort of alluded to in the intro, quite a varied background. I started off actually working for Qantas as a flight attendant many, many years ago. And it was during that time that I went back to study and I did my pharmacy degree while I was flying. It's actually been quite nice having Qantas join us as a member. Most recently, it felt a little bit nostalgic because I had a wonderful time working as a flight attendant many years ago. And from there, I did my pharmacy degree. I worked as a hospital pharmacist for a little while and then a community pharmacist before I ended up in the academic world running some projects for the University of Sydney. And one of the projects I was running was around health literacy and safe medicine use. And from that, I actually did my PhD at that time. But, I don't know about anyone else, but, you do your PhD, sometimes you think, what on earth am I going to do next with this PhD if you don't want to be an academic? So from there, I ended up working in health technology assessment for a little while in health economics and outcome research. And then, again, moving on into the corporate world, I worked for a couple of consultancy firms and mainly around healthcare strategy and working with pharmaceutical companies, hospitals, government, etc. And then a couple of years ago, I was one of those probably COVID moments where I went, what do I really want to do here? And I feel like I'm still growing, but deciding what I want to do when I grow up. But certainly this position came up and it intrigued me, particularly the area of mental health. And I think at that time, at the beginning of COVID, many people were probably struggling. And certainly I know I was very busy and burnout and all those things were of concern to me. And I think I reflected on what I wanted for life. So I ended up applying for this position with the Corporate Mental Health Alliance. And here I am now, 2 years in, just coming up to.
Yeah, 2 years. Did you say?
Yeah, almost 2 years. It's been very, I know. I think COVID, I don't know about you guys, but I find I go, oh, is that 1 or 2 years?
It's been a weird sort of time warp sync kind of thing. Like, has it been a decade? Has it been a year? Who knows? Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, so I'd imagine it would have flown past. But the Corporate Mental Health Alliance obviously is, or maybe not obviously, for our listeners, it is a subsidiary of the Mind Forward Alliance, or it's originated in the UK. But we'd love to, and in fact, we've spoken a little bit about the alliance with Lucy Brogden. This is going back, I don't know, we just talked about it. Could have been 5 years ago, could have been 20.
Well, Lucy was in our first year, wasn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. So it definitely wasn't 5 years ago because we only started the podcast 2 years ago. But it feels, it was a while ago.
Logic dictates that it couldn't have been 5 years ago.
For the listeners that haven't listened to the episode of Lucy Brogden, do yourself a favour and listen to that one. But what we want to do is really, and that was only part of the conversation with Lucy, but we really want to focus on the work of the Corporate Mental Health Alliance in this discussion with you. Who better to talk to about it than the CEO? So can you tell us and our listeners what the Alliance is all about?
Well, the Alliance, as you mentioned, it originated, the model of it originated from the City Mental Health Alliance, which started off in the UK some 15 years before on the back of the GFC, as I understand it, and some suicides that occurred within the financial services industry. And when the City Mental Health, or the Corporate Mental Health Alliance was I guess, being thought about and what it was going to become. It started off actually before COVID, probably a year before we actually officially launched in October 2020. And it was a bunch of leaders that got together who were talking about the importance of mental health in the workplace and how to create mental healthy workplaces. And no one seemed to have the answers. And so they decided to form this alliance, and they went looking around for a model, and that's where they saw the City Mental Health Alliance, and now what has become and evolved into the Mind Forward Alliance, that's a global body. So we are a chapter of them here in Australia. And the main work we are is as our title says, we're an alliance of about 25 members now, with about a reach across all those members of about 500,000 employees. So it's growing, and so is our impact. And our aim is to share our knowledge within our own membership, but more broadly with every Australian employee out there and employer. Anything that we learn as larger corporates, what can we share with others? So part of the work we're doing is collating some of the resources that we have within our organisations and making those available to anyone through our website. We run network events, we run other events around learning sessions and case studies that we present for our own members. So it really is it's a network of learning, if I can sort of call it that, and sharing. It is very much about what you give as well as a membership. So we're not probably a traditional membership where they sit back and wait for us to give them as the alliance everything. It is very much about our members sharing with us as an alliance, us bringing it together and then sharing it back to the broader audience. So we're still learning and growing as we go. We're only just over 2 years old. And I think as we're reimagining work, we're also having to reimagine what does workplace mental health look like. So we're small. I think we're quite agile in the way that we're operating. So we're trying to really listen to what's going on out there, and then sort of adapt what we need to do as we go along.
Yeah, and I know you're getting some great advice. Yeah, I know you're getting some great advice along the way from experts like Carlo Caponecchia and so on. So it's quite. Yeah, it's got a lot of great names associated with the alliance, both in terms of members and the organisations that are represented, as well as the quantity, obviously, of Australian employees that are represented, and then also the academic and subject matter oversight. You talked about how the City Mental Health Alliance UK, one of the things that really kicked off the necessity for that and the origin of that was the number of suicides that were happening post-GFC. Was there a tipping point or a reason why Australia started as an offshoot of that at that particular time a couple of years ago?
No, I don't think it was anything specific around a particular, event or those types of events. It was, and I wasn't around at that time, and I am only hearing the discussions that were had post that event. But it was, I guess, the passionate people and leaders, and we've got, our chair is Stephen Worrell from Microsoft, who's an incredibly passionate advocate. People like Lucy Brogden, who also sits on our expert advisory group. They're, PwC, Kristen Stubbins, a number of those who ended up being our founding members, ended up, said it was a group of people getting together that was starting to talk about this and said, well, actually, together we can do more and go farther and make a greater impact if we do it as a collective, as opposed to each of us trying to go it alone. And as you know, businesses don't always share with each other what they're doing. And what we've found in the Alliance, actually, there's an incredible sharing around this because I think people are so important to our membership. They're people, and mental health is so important. So we don't actually see any sort of competitiveness or people withholding information or anything to try and get a competitive advantage. It really is a genuineness. And I'm surprised at how incredibly open people are. And our membership are and our leads are around the challenges they're facing. And then collectively, what can we do? And we saw this in COVID where many organisations had, we were saying, what do we do for our staff? They're working remotely. How do we check in with them? And, people put out a call and said, well, what are you doing? And they said, oh, well, we've done this for our staff. And we had this call and everyone was saying, oh, we did this. And we said, oh, that's a great idea. We're going to try that. And so it was a really... it's really quite an open, our network sessions, our functional leads meetings are quite an open sharing forum. And we usually generally pick a topic, and now in a more structured way than earlier in COVID. And we try and discuss how we can share and learn from each other.
Yeah, great. And that's definitely one of the best benefits we've heard from people like Sean Ralph and Laura Kirby, who are part of the Alliance through their respective organisations, that they really appreciate that. This is not seen as a competitive advantage. This is actually about having that positive impact on all these workers. It's great that people are willing to share so freely.
And look, I mean, the best part of my job is I actually get to work with the most incredibly passionate and amazing board, all our founding members, the senior leads from them, and as well as all the functional leads that we work with on a more day-to-day basis. These, best job in the world, and I couldn't ask for a better workplace if I think about them as my greater workplace. But yeah, and they really, really want to make a difference. And I think that is, and we are, yes, a coalition of the willing. But it is great to see that people are willing to contribute so much.
And so can you give us, I guess, an overview of the types of organisations who are forming your membership at the moment?
We're very fortunate to have quite a cross-section of various sectors. So we have technology companies such as your Microsoft, Avanade. We have financial services and insurances companies, three big, retailers, Coles, Bunnings and Woolworths. And we also have Qantas as one of our aviation. We also have some smaller companies too. So not all our members are really large. So we have our largest members is sort of Woolworths of sort of 200,000 plus employees, right down to we have sort of Latrobe Health Services and Galderma, one of our smaller ones, where, we have less than 500 employees. And it's a really great opportunity for the larger corporates, again, in there to share information with the smaller, but also we learn a lot from our smaller organisations who are very connected to their people too. So it's a really great learning environment. But we are fortunate to have probably a number of sectors involved. There are obviously sectors we'd like to get involved through energy construction, and we know that the building industry has high rates of mental health issues and suicide. So if we can involve more sectors, it's our aim is actually to grow sector-wide, and we're not actually growing ourselves by promoting ourselves. It's been very much an organic process of people joining us because they're interested.
And what's the process if we've got listeners who are representing companies who aren't members at the moment, how would they go about joining?
Send me an email via our website, and I'm very happy to share information. And we share, information about the topics of interest that we're doing. We're following our program of work, our fees. I'm very happy to then jump on a call and explain what we do.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So we've talked about how there's a lot of sharing of resources. What types of resources, if you could give us an indication, Kim, are most commonly shared between these organisations?
I think at the moment, we are in the process of collating, I think I mentioned earlier, some of the resources themselves. So everything seems to be an easy process when you think about it, but in practice it actually has a little bit more of a challenge because there's obviously IP issues attached to some of the documents, etc. But the aim is for us we're doing a sort of a gap analysis of where we need resources. So we're doing resources around leadership. So how do we run sort of training programs? What sort of resources are available around their leadership from all of our organisations? People sharing, things around their EAP providers. Some of the discussions we've had have been around how did I find an EAP provider? What do we get from our EAP provider, etc. We are currently doing, I guess, in terms of, it's not a sharing of a resource, but it is a sharing of collection of data. So we have just, in the last 4 months of last year, ran a survey amongst 14 of our membership organisations and asking around job factors, burnout, productivity, attachment to work, sort of connection, as well as external stresses that they might be experiencing. And our report will come out in February. I will be sharing the results of that across those members that we have spoken or participated in the survey. So part of that is us creating, and probably in every 2 years, we'll do this sort of survey to see what's important to employees. So this was an employee survey with a leadership component as well. So understanding what's actually going on out there and then being able to develop our resources. And one of the things we're very keen to not do is duplicate what's already out there. So when we are trying to collate resources, it might be a shorter version of something, but with resources that will links out to the resources that are already out there. But, so many companies do and organisations do an amazing job. We don't want to reinvent wheels all over again.
Yeah, and that's a good way to go, and that's our philosophy as well. Why create the wheel, or recreate the wheel? So if we can identify some people doing good things or have good resources out there, we can point to that rather than duplicate. And that's one of the reasons we do this podcast as well. We like to feature people doing good things on here and share that out.
Yep, definitely.
But yeah, our resource sharing is evolving. Again, we're 2 years in and trying to see what we can pull in from all our members and then actually share out. And our aim is to make nearly everything publicly available where we can to anybody beyond our membership. So again, it's about serving all working Australians and all businesses out there. And I know the National Workplace Initiative is doing an amazing job too of putting together resources. So, what we can add from the business point of view, we will definitely share through the NWI as well, where we can.
Yeah, and the latest resource, if people aren't across it yet, from the NWI is their version 2 of their blueprint, which very much aligns to the integrated model of workplace mental health that we regularly speak to on the podcast. So we might put a link to that in the resources as well.
So what would be, I guess, some of the themes or issues that are coming through from your member groups in terms of what their challenges are, or what are some of the issues that they're wanting to address?
I think we're here, definitely hybrid is still a big topic of conversation amongst many of our members. I think we're all working out, or what does hybrid really mean? Is it just job flexibility? How do we change the way we work? How do we get people back into the office? I think is one of the other challenges, not because they want to dictate that you need to be back in the office for 3 or 4 days a week. It's more about that sort of collaboration, the connectivity. So how do we make sure, many of our organisations are sort of looking at ways in which to bring people into the office for different reasons, as opposed to just, and I'm probably sure you hear this quite a bit, rather than just they're doing the same work they did at home in the offices. How do we actually make it a place where it is about meetings, or it is about those water cooler conversations, or an opportunity to plan and all that sort of things. So that's definitely, the hybrid is a big challenge. And I think one of the questions we've got is around connectivity, and it's not so much people who are coming to the office a couple of days a week. It's people who aren't coming in for months at a time, and how do you check in with those people? How do you know that they're definitely okay? How do you make sure you take care of their mental health as well? So I think many organisations are grappling with that aspect of what does hybrid really mean, and how do we provide the best support both in the office and at home to those people who are working in that mode. Definitely upskilling, I think, around the psych health and safety piece. How do they upskill their managers? How do they upskill senior leaders? How do they raise awareness amongst the leadership about the importance of this? There's definitely the psychosocial risk assessment piece, and all the regulations that are coming in are definitely top of mind for many, many organisations. And how do they make sure not only that they comply, but that they are doing absolutely the right thing by their employees? And I think, we are a coalition of the willing, and I think many of our members are probably incredibly passionate about doing the right thing. I'm just trying to think what else definitely burnout and fatigue. I think we've all had that conversation of last year was probably a very hard year. We came off the back of the pandemic, not quite finished, but feeling a sense of fatigue, exhaustion, and I think there's concerns about burnout and people taking enough leave. And making sure that they have time away. So I think that's the things, sort of the main things we're hearing about, and probably the integration piece. How do we integrate this into our culture, into our systems, into our org structure, etc.? How do we make psych health and safety a really important part of everything we do?
Yeah, okay. So some fairly significant themes coming through there, and some wicked problems to grapple with. So interesting work ahead for sure.
Yeah, it is. I think that the hard part is in all of this is you look at it and you think there are so many things to do, and how do you actually focus on, I think, doing one or two things really, really well where you actually can make a difference. And that's sort of the thing that we do at the beginning of roughly every year around that February-March piece. We get together as an organisation with all our members and we start to talk about what's really important for the next 12 to 18 months. And we agree on one or two things that we think we're going to do for the next 12 to 18 months, and that might be a piece of research. Last year we partnered with UNSW to do the psychosocial risk modules that we did, which has some case studies from our businesses, as well as pulling together sort of an overview of how to go about a psychosocial risk assessment, with then links out to safe work, to you guys as well, as other external resources people can go and access. Again, we weren't reinventing the wheel. It was just a way of sort of bringing an overview to people who were starting out and didn't know where to start. So those are the sort of things we decided last year. Psychosocial risk assessment, given the regulations, was an important part. This year, we're looking at different ways of perhaps expanding on what's the next piece around that comes on from that.
Hi listeners, Jason here. We hope you're enjoying this latest podcast episode. Now, if you're like Joelle, Alicia and myself and enjoy learning from the best, then the Flourish DX Academy is for you. The Academy includes free e-learning courses on the ISO 45003 standard for psychological health and safety at work, and associated topics such as how to conduct a psychosocial risk assessment and how to create the business case for psych health and safety. All courses feature high-quality videos, downloadable resources, multi-choice questions, and a downloadable training certificate on completion. Take your learning to the next level with all Flourish DX Academy courses included within the Flourish DX mobile app. Select podcast episodes from the Psych Health and Safety podcast and sister podcasts from Canada and the USA are also included. Get started with Flourish DX for free at www.flourishdx.com/get-started. That's www.flourishdx.com/get-started. Now back to this episode. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that point, as you say, where companies aren't just considering how do they meet the legal responsibilities in terms of psychosocial risk management, but embed that as into business as usual. We see at the moment there is a lot of short-term thinking going, all I need to do is do a risk assessment and then I just need to update my risk register and then that's it. Well, if you want to drive positive mental health outcomes in your workforce, you actually need to change the way you operate based on that information, not just put it in a risk register that, no one reviews or is only reviewed every couple of years and isn't operationalized. I liken it to, maybe having a quality management system or health and safety, management system. If it's just policies and documents sitting in a shelf or in a internal folder somewhere on your computer, that no one looks like and it's not talked about every day or doesn't change the way you operate, it's not going to drive improvements in outcomes that you want, whether that's quality or reliability or safety. Yeah. So, I'm looking forward to that point. And hopefully there'll be some good case studies coming out of your alliance where companies are actually embedding this into business as usual and then not just doing the minimum requirement of let's just assess risk at a surface level and update our risk register, but they're actually then really changing the design and management of work based on a continuous improvement process.
I think that's the key piece is it's not set and forget. It's you've got to keep doing this and you've got to keep, surveying your people year in, year out. You've got to keep looking at these risks and updating your register and the way in which you operate. I certainly know that even just from the last 2 years, the conversation has really changed in our membership around what's important and how so it is becoming more around the integration and how do we embed it in our systems, as opposed to sort of that, as you just mentioned, having it on a risk register or just having a document, we've got it, tick, we're done. There really is a real drive from our membership to really do it right.
Yeah, and we're even hearing that from companies who've even gone to the point of getting certified to ISO 45003, that they're like, oh, great, we've done that, but we still need to operationalize this standard. Yeah. And so there's a difference between ticking the box and actually doing it and driving positive impact. Yeah. I really hope that companies don't just think they'll do a risk assessment once and then that's actually going to lead to the mental health outcomes that they're expecting, because it won't.
It is quite a daunting process. So for many of, particularly a large corporate, when you start, sometimes too, do you do it by division? Do you do it, across your whole organisation at once? I mean, there's a lot of steps, I think, and it's, hearing from our members is sometimes it's not that people don't want to do it. It's really how do you do it well, and then how do you operationalise it? And I think that's the big challenge for businesses is the desires there, but the levels of maturity vary, and some companies are way, way ahead and others are just starting out on that journey. So it's really adapting as they go along and learning from those that have already done it and how they've done that.
Yeah, in the spirit of sharing, as the Alliance members do, what we're seeing from the largest corporates in how they start doing it is is that competency uplift, as you were talking about, has been one of the focuses of your work with UNSW and Carlo and his team. But while you're updating policies and updating your health and safety management system to ensure it encapsulates psychosocial risk management, most large corporates are starting with a division or a group that they've already identified risk in, to just kind of start to set up their process. Going to like a 10 or 20,000 person plus kind of rollout of this, you can fail really badly and scar the business and the people who participate in the process.
Yeah.
So it's better off to make your mistakes in a smaller sample in order to pilot the process and make sure that it's really slick before you scale up.
Yeah.
So that's not just what we advise, but definitely what we've seen. Some large corporates that we work with in the Alliance, that's the process that they seem to be taking, starting smaller. And for them, smaller could be, 1,000, 2,000 people.
It's more like 10.
Yeah. And then looking at how does this now scale up? So they can do that initial kind of piloting of the process whilst updating their management systems and building up the capability of key people in their organisation, whether that's functional team or line managers.
Yeah. And I think it is a capability uplift is a critical component as well. Can't just roll it out and then say, off you go, everyone. It is about the right training and skills uplift.
Yeah. Because you wouldn't roll out, a whole safety process, right, without some training on how to actually use it. But we are seeing that some companies are making that mistake of just going, we've got one or two people who are experts in our HR team or health and safety team. They're going to drive the whole process, and then it becomes like, that's their project. It's not something that the company is doing together in order to realise the benefit. It's like, these two people are going to make this massive change in the organisation without any buy-in or engagement or education or anything. So it's a step that some companies are. Because it's not actually dictated in the legislation, you need to train people. It is in ISO 45003. You need to think about competency requirements.
It is in the Act. So the issue is that the regs are
an extension of the
Act. So the Act includes the requirement to provide training and instruction, etc.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, an important thing that people shouldn't overlook is that you need to look at the regs in relation to the Act, and so all of those primary duties and the sort of sub-clauses under the primary duties, it's basically saying these also apply to psychosocial hazard and risk. So as you do for physical health and safety hazards, you must also do for psychosocial hazards.
Yeah, and one thing you've been big at saying, we've been doing, Kim, we've been doing some sharing ourselves through some live Zoom workshops around the new regs because they are quite topical at the moment and people are trying to get their heads around it. And Joelle's been our ex-regulator, subject matter expert, who's come in to talk about that. And one of the questions that people are surprised by the answer to is, hey, let's say I do a psychosocial risk assessment. Let's say then I do some actions on the back of that. Does that mean I'm complying with the regs? And Joelle's answer is always
no.
Well done. It's like we rehearse that. Yeah. So what while we're here, what do companies need? Because a lot of them are thinking, we just need to consult with staff, do a risk assessment, run a survey, focus groups, whatever, update our risk register, and we're done, right?
So you need to have a safe system of work.
Yeah.
So that's under the Primary Act. And so to meet the requirements of that legislation or the regulation rather, that means that you need to have a safe system of work in place in relation to psychosocial hazards, which means that you have, periodic assessment regular identification of psychosocial hazards, assessing the risks, putting controls in place, assessing the efficacy of the controls, going in and making changes if you find that those controls aren't working, if there's been changes, if your health and safety reps request a reevaluation, all of those same triggers that are there within the rest of the legislation, they also apply to your psychosocial risk management processes.
Yeah, because and I think people are confused because sometimes if they look at instruments like COPSOC, which is used for psychosocial risk assessment, it will recommend, re-administer every 12 to 18 months. But the regulations actually suggest, there's other times when you actually have to do it, not just on a 12 to 18 month cycle. And if we think about other hazards, and like in psychosocial hazards to physical hazards, you should be identifying and assessing the risk whenever something changes in your organisation. And if you think about workplaces today, it can change pretty quickly. I mean, we've seen a lot of change in the last 2 years. And how many risk assessments have been done for psychosocial hazards? There's probably a lot that haven't happened when they've needed to. So, pretty interesting. I guess, what's happening in this space. And it'll be interesting to see how the Alliance members, really, because I know they're all interested, not just in meeting the minimum standard, but actually doing something that drives the impact that they want and doing better practice or, doing best practice, not just compliance. So, has there been any discussion, Kim, about, reaching that standard where we're actually going to do psychosocial risk management well, and not just that legal compliance piece?
Look, we haven't had any, specific, discussions around it. But it is a topic of interest at our functional league meetings every couple of months. It is, the question you just asked around how do I know I'm meeting the standard if I do this, I think that's a really challenging piece for many organisations to say, actually, how do I know I'm actually doing minimum? But not only that, what is the best practice around it? And I think, again, I mentioned earlier, we're looking to how do we do the next piece of work. So is there, how do we define best practice and what does that look like? I think collectively, I think it would be a wonderful project for our group to do, to come up with what we're doing and how we define that and make sure that we kind of, sign on to something around that would be probably an ideal situation. But it's definitely a work in progress is all I'm going to say. Is we're still learning as we go along as well.
Yeah, and look, we did think that particularly large businesses would be more proactive in this space and going, well, the regulations are coming. We have a model regs, we have model code. We should actually be doing something in this area. But we found they've been actually highly reactive, and it's only when the regs have been published have they then acted very quickly with a sense of urgency, usually due to a board directive going, oh, how are you managing this risk for us as board directors? So, it's very interesting. But what for those naysayers out there that says we don't need regs, people should just do this because it's the right thing to do. I can tell you regs work because we're definitely seeing it on our end.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I think good intentions don't also lead to actions. So the intentions are obviously of our members are good intentions, and I think, as I said, the conversation in the last year and 2 years has really moved on around what people are intending or wanting to do or are doing within their organisations. There's definitely a lot more action in this space, and I can't comment on whether that was reactive or not, but. I think just the conversation in general in this space has really elevated around what needs to be done, and compared to 2 years ago where people, I think, are still talking about, yoga and fruit bowls, and, we're now really starting to tackle, I think, the harder things and starting to look at those upstream factors and, job design, reasonable work hours, workload, all those sorts of things are starting to come onto the table, I think, more so than perhaps 2 years ago, just from my observation.
And the role in the Alliance is commendable in that regards because, you kindly extended an invitation to Alicia Joel and myself to go to the annual gathering last year. And like you say, the maturity of the conversation was great in comparison to the last wellbeing conference I went to in the UK. And they are still talking about the fruit bowls and yogas and sit-stand desks and that sort of thing. And in fact, I even saw something from Mind Forward Alliance in the UK that put out a white paper around this, and they said health and safety has no place in workplace mental health. I'm like, you are joking. You're just setting back the conversation 5 to 10 years.
Yeah. I mean, it is interesting about the UK. I think Australia is definitely leading the world. I know maybe New Zealand's going to argue the point, but I think we're definitely leading the world in many respects around the way that we're thinking about this and what the actions that have been taken in our regulations, etc. I absolutely think. And our conversations with the UK, I was on a call middle of last year, and people were very interested in what we were doing here in Australia because they hadn't even started any of that process in many of the organisations within the UK.
Yeah. Now, I'll be over in London next week to hopefully convince some people of the merits of this. And it's becoming easier now with the World Health Organization and International Labour Organization recognising the importance of psychosocial risk management and a holistic approach to work and mental health.
And I think there is a positive too. If you're a global organisation and you've got an Australian base who's already doing this work, to then start to look at what are the learnings we got from Australia and how do we actually take them to the rest of our organisation. I think we're a great sized company country as well to sort of test and try things before we start to roll them out to some of the bigger, particularly if you've got a bigger base somewhere else overseas. So,
and we're definitely seeing that with some of the multinationals we're working with. Based on legal reviews, they're saying that Australia is actually the place that they need to from a legal perspective. It's got the strongest legislation that dictates companies need to do this. And so they are looking at, as you say, Australia is a bit of a proving ground, and then, escalating outwards from there. But I feel like Australia, through alliances like work like your alliance is doing, as well as other bodies like the National Workplace Initiative and so on, the reputation Australia is getting for mental health is phenomenal. As I say, it's like selling German cars. People really are thinking mental health and health and safety are synonymous with Australia, which is fantastic. Take that, Canada.
So, Kim, what does the future of the Alliance look like?
It feels like there's so much to do. That's the problem. I think I would love to do many things, and I go back to the 2 or 3 things a week we can do. I think one of the things, our sort of main program areas of work are around we have an early in career program, which we kicked off at the end of 2021, with a real focus on how do we support those that are starting off in the workplace within their first 8 years within a job. And that's really sort of had gained some momentum. We've done some focus groups, we've done a report, and now we're looking at onboarding and EAP use. And so those sorts of a real focus on how do we do that start point, and just start to do it really well at the beginning of people's careers. There's a piece around our data and research. We're still interested in looking at opportunities as we go along to add to the evidence base. So how do we take one of the programs that's already being run in some of our organisations and pilot it in others, and then do an evaluation? So and partnering with academics around that and our expert advisory group. So there's definitely a piece for us. I think we would really like to use our businesses to contribute to the evidence base. I know that there's evidence out there, but I don't think there's a huge amount still in the workplace, and I think it'd be great if we could do more around that and to contribute to that. Obviously, leadership. We've got our CEO forum that we do every October now. Last year, we had 70 CEOs and senior leaders attend our dinner, and the conversation was really around how do leaders start to embed this within their organisation. What does a new era of work look like, and what does mental health look like? I think there's that piece around further collaboration. Who else do we collaborate with more broadly than just us and our alliance? I think there's, so many great minds out there. So I think we're looking at sort of collaborations, broader collaborations, and just trying to think, I guess, focus really around that psychosocial risk piece. How do we do the next bit well? How do we educate and inform our members around what best practice might look like? How do we share around that as well? So I think we're starting to talk around job design, job crafting, what does good work look like? So again, tapping into our expert advisory group around that too. But a lot to do, I actually feel like. And also, there's an interesting conversation we've been having around supply chain as well. So how do we as an organisation give back? So we're doing a wellbeing week in February that is open to all employees of our organisations, and it covers topics of life, mind and body. And if we prove this concept, how do we make this then available to smaller organisations or people within our member organisations' supply chains? So these are things we're starting to talk about, not just what we offer for our membership, but actually how do we give back more and all our learnings more broadly within your own organisation's supply chains as well. So I think there's a lot to do.
Definitely a lot to do.
Yeah, as you say, there's no shortage of things to do. It's about where you're going to focus. It's like the biggest decision.
Like our dev pipeline.
It is a bit like our dev pipeline. It's always like, you got to sacrifice one child. Like, which one is it going to be in order to, yes, I've got 10 years worth of ideas. It used to be 5. I've got 10 years worth of ideas. That, if I had 100 devs, I could keep them very busy.
Well, capacity is the biggest piece we find is, how do we're only a small team, there's 3 of us, so how do we sort of do more, so do we hire more people? There's lots of questions around even just ourselves being just 2 years old. And how do we scale up and have a greater impact too?
Oh, you're a startup like us. We're only 4 people, a couple of years ago, and we're, 15 now or something. Yeah. So, yeah, you'll scale up quickly, Kim.
I'm coming to you for advice.
Nice one. So, Kim, at this point in our conversations with our guests, we always like to ask, if you were to look into the future, what would your hopes for the future of workplace mental health be? And if you can keep that to under 20 minutes, that'd be great.
No, definitely. Look, I think just the normalisation of the conversations we're having within the workplace, I think that's probably a critical piece, that there's sort of I think we're seeing definitely a reduction in stigma, but there's still a lot of people not willing to speak up. And I think that freedom of being able to speak up comfortably, so that's that space being very safe in terms of being able to speak to your manager or even your peers around some of the times we might struggle. Definitely an improvement to perhaps around the way we work and consider good work. So I think I don't know what that might look like in terms of I don't know, I'm not big on more regulation being necessarily the answer, but do we look at reasonable work hours, and do we look at different models of integrating it within our organisations? How do we think about it differently? So I think having it absolutely core to your business, it can't be just a nice to do. It has to be absolutely part of your culture, part of your leadership's KPIs, whatever they might look like. I think a real embedding of this as being just like your physical safety piece. The psychological part has to absolutely be part of that. And perhaps that we don't exist in reality because we've solved all the problems. So that would be a nice outcome, although I don't see that happening anytime soon. But I think, it really is to me around having that safe space of people feeling like it's okay to not be okay at work. But it's also how do we actually not only treat those that are in a reactive manner, but looking at that early intervention prevention piece. And I think there's a lot more work for us to be doing that upstream around that prevention piece. So how do we stop people getting to a place? How do we actually help them thrive?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so we're with you on that one. Yeah.
So that's it. And then I think that there's the other piece, which we haven't yet tackled and would like to as we evolve, I think, is around people with neurodiversity, people with chronic and complex mental health conditions within the workplace. So how do we do more around supporting those people within the workplace? I think that's a personal area I'd like to sort of look at down the track as well.
Yeah, well, we can definitely introduce you to Peter Kelly from our team, who ticks all the neurodiversity boxes, I think. So he's a pretty big advocate for that as well.
I think we're probably close to 50% of our employees have a neurodivergence of some sort.
Yeah. It's funny. Maybe they're just attracted to working in startups. I don't know.
Maybe.
Yeah. But Peter is being a psychologist himself, and having a lived experience of being neurodiverse. He's pretty passionate about helping companies to think about how they accommodate neurodiversity.
Because I think it can be quite scary, not scary, but it can be challenging sometimes for a manager to know what to do, and I think there's an upskilling around that as well. It's not that people don't want to help or do the right thing, it's often just I just don't know how. I think the more conversations you can have and the more we talk about that, I think the better it will be overall. And again, it comes back to that normalisation of our workplace.
And that, to go back to my previous point about systems of work, like that's why it's important to have a system of work, because you can tell managers that it's important, but they actually need to have a framework that says, well, here is how you have a conversation with an employee about what accommodations they require, and here is our policy and framework that will enable you to make those accommodations, and here's how we sort of decide whether an accommodation is reasonable or not, and what evidence do we potentially require from a medical provider, and all of that sort of thing. So you do actually need that sort of that organisational scaffolding to support the leader in being able to actually support that employee to be able to work in the organisation in the best way that they can, and in a way that's protecting their mental health as well.
Absolutely.
So, do you have any words of advice for listeners who want to work in the field of psych health and safety?
Well, being that I'm a newbie, I guess, to some extent into this field, I think it's immensely enjoyable. It's incredibly interesting. I think you can make a huge impact on people's lives. I would recommend anything to do with this space. I really, really enjoyed the learnings I've had over the last couple of years, and we definitely need practitioners as we go along. I mean, there's no doubt that this is a growing area and an important area. So I think if you're interested, absolutely follow this pathway. And I think you guys are probably the best people to talk to about the pathway you've held. Joelle with your regulator background, and Jason as well, and the company you've got. I mean, I find this an incredibly interesting space, and so much to learn always. There's always something new. And you can go down so many pathways, I think, too, is the other aspect of it as well. It's not just, one sort of area. I think there's so many things you can do within this space. Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, Kim, thank you so much. It's you did not disappoint, even though you made us wait at least a year to get on.
You're very kind.
But no, it's great hearing about the Alliance. You're doing amazing work. And if that's what's happened in the first 2 years, we're really looking forward to seeing what happens in the next 2.
Absolutely.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on. And again, this is all a collective effort across companies and organisations more broadly. It's we've connected in with you, we've connected with so many other organisations, and I think we all have so much to learn from each other, not just within our alliance for us to share, but also to learn from other organisations and what you're doing, because it is a bit of a connect the dots and a web of how you actually bring this all together to solve some of the problems that are actually occurring.
Yeah, and we'll put a link to the Corporate Mental Health Alliance website in the show notes so that people can find out more and get in touch with you if they'd like to become a member. That would be great.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
No, thank you. Okay, so listeners, that brings us to the end of today's episode. So don't forget, we do record these over video while we have our conversations with our guests. So if you prefer video over audio, feel free to go to the Flourish GX YouTube channel to check them out. You'll also find that we take short snippets from these discussions and we put them on the Flourish DX LinkedIn page. So follow that to get access to that content. And while you're over on LinkedIn, feel free to connect with Joelle and myself if you want to continue the conversation. And Kim hangs out there a little bit as well. So if you get in contact with her, that's probably another way to do it. But thanks again, listeners. That brings us to the end. We'll catch you next episode.
You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast. To stay up to date with the latest on psychological injury prevention, follow Flourish DX on LinkedIn and subscribe to the Psych Health and Safety Podcast at www.psychealthandsafety.com.